Hello, everybody. Today I'd like to update you on the story surrounding the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus when it comes to the phone bending and when it comes to touch disease and Apple's response to these issues. The iPhone 6 was considerably easier to bend than the older iPhones that came before it. Even though the iPhone 5 didn't have a very durable casing compared to the iPhone 4 when it came to the corners being crushed in, the iPhone 6 won up to the iPhone 5 by very easily bending right in the middle of the phone. And you can see that in the picture above. I'll show you a more extreme version of bend gait here. Now, when the phone bends to that extent, it will exhibit something called touch disease. Touch disease is when you get these flickering bars in the top of the screen and the touchscreen doesn't function properly. This will occur because the chip on the motherboard responsible for touch is going to warp as the phone gets bent, and that's going to cause the touchscreen to stop working. This affected many devices. Now, when this happens at Apple, it typically follows a three-step process. The first step is to deny that there's anything wrong and say that it's happening to a very small number of people. And if this is happening to you, in the words of my first landlord, John Grossbard, when we found bed bugs in my new office, it's probably something you guys did. It's not us. We didn't do anything wrong. It's probably something that you did. The second stage of this process is that Apple will be sued. And shortly after they're sued, they will say, okay, maybe in the most condescending language, some of these phones may have had some problems. You were probably using it wrong anyway. You're probably putting it in your pocket wrong or, calling people wrong or holding it wrong or something like that. But we'll level with you. Instead of charging you $349 to fix it, we'll charge you $149 to fix it. And this is one of those areas where they got in a lot of trouble. Because typically when Apple would release an extended warranty program, when they would finally admit fault, what they would do is they would fix the issue for free, whereas here they're holding their ground. Not only are they not fixing the issue on the 6, they're only fixing it on the 6 Plus, but they're charging you $149. Apple's marketing strategy fails them in one way. They target a high-end luxury demographic that's willing to pay a premium for these products. Those people are typically people who are wealthier, who might have more spare time. And people who are wealthy with spare time have that time and money to spend on attorneys if they feel that a company is messing with them. And that's exactly what happened here. More class action lawsuits were opened looking into Apple's business practices, and over here you can see that by Apple's own internal documents, it was found out during the discovery portion of this court case that Apple had done tests on the iPhone 6 Plus where they determined that the 6 Plus was more than 7 times more likely to bend than the 5S, and the iPhone 6 was more than 3 times more likely to bend than the iPhone 5S as well. Now, this does put quite a hole in the theory that they didn't know anything about this and that it was probably something you did if the phone wound up bending. This was not something that you probably did, and it was not your fault if the phone wound up bending. So when you would go into an Apple store and they would say that it was extremely rare that this happened, this was Apple knowingly lying to you. Even before this case was filed in court, it was clear to most people that Apple understood that they had made a grave mistake with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, because with the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus, they used entirely different aluminum to construct the case. As many in the industry know, if you look at something like the A1278 MacBook, where from 2009 through 2016 they sold a machine with almost identical casing, or the Mac Pro, which has barely seen a refresh since 2013, Apple doesn't really change up the casing from year to year that much. So when they make a drastic change, it's typically for a good reason. So if Apple's saying that this phone has no problems, it's very rare that anything bends, why did you change up the material entirely if it was so good? And I think we already have the answer to that question. It was also clear from the court documents that Apple changed the design of the phone to start including underfill under the chip that controls the touchscreen on the motherboard. You don't redesign the motherboard if you have a design that has no problems, so it's very clear that they knew that they did something wrong here. Now, some people may think I'm a little late here and that I'm just getting to this news after everybody else and I'm jumping on the bandwagon of Apple disdain, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. I actually covered this issue over 25 months ago before most news sites were covering it, and I went over every single thing that's going on right now. In that video, I started off by saying today I'm going to predict the future, and most of what I went over in that video actually happened. Not only did the phones fail in large numbers exactly the way I said it would fail, but the very fix that I proposed in that video is the fix that Apple adopted just a month after that video got over 100,000 views. That video came out in April of 2016, and Apple decided to start including underfill on the phone in May of 2016. I'll play you that video so that you can get a little bit of an idea of where I was coming from when I predicted this issue over 25 months ago. So today I'd like to take some time out of my workday to predict the future for you. A lot of you may have noticed that with the iPhone 6, it's a little bit more prone to having issues with touch than the older iPhone. You may notice that when you drop it, that you lose touch functionality on the screen. You can still see the screen, but when you go to swipe, nothing actually works. Because this is a phone, because it is such a hyper-portable device that's going to get banged around in a pocket, that's going to get tossed, it's going to get dropped, far more often than a stationary device, these are manufactured in a different fashion so that they don't fail as often. How do we create a device where we have all these balls sitting under a chip in a device that's going to be dropped and thrown around regularly, but keep these balls from cracking? The way they do it is they inject something called underfill under the chip. So once they're done manufacturing it, once they're done putting together the board and putting that chip on the board, is they're going to inject underfill all around the chip. It's this epoxy-like material. Think of it like a glue that hardens, and it's going to hold the chip in place so that even if it's getting dropped, the pressure and the stress is being placed on the underfill rather than it being placed on the actual chip itself. This is under many chipsets in modern smartphones, and it's under many chipsets inside of the actual iPhone. But it's not under the Touch IC in the iPhone 6. So when you drop it, all of the other ICs are kind of protected from damage because they have this underfill material under it. But with the iPhone 6, the Touch ICs themselves don't have underfill under them. So what happens is when you drop it, everything else winds up being okay, except for the screen, obviously. But the Touch IC can become fractured or damaged, or the solder balls can become disconnected or broken, and they would not have broken if there was underfill there. I'm going to show you what that flaw looks like on the actual motherboard in this video coming up next. This video came from Jason at STS Telecom. I highly suggest that you check out his channel, and I'll leave a link to the video below where he's repairing this iPhone 6 Plus that doesn't have touch. Thank you very much, Jason, for allowing me to use this video.
Now this time that pad actually came off. M1 over here evaporated this time whenever I ran my iron across it. Now what I'm running into is that pad, even if it seems to be connected, is not connected. I mean, it's just not. Now, I haven't went as far to check it for continuity. If I set my multimeter to beep mode, I'm relatively confident. If I were to check between, let's say, if I were to check between M1, and I'm going to have to heat this up now before I clean this. If I were to check between M1 right here, at this pad that's now missing, if I were to check continuity between there and this pin right here, I would get a sporadic beep. That's my assumption. I don't think I would get a solid, steady beep. I think I would get a really, really shitty connection.
What's interesting to me is that according to Apple's own internal documentation, they changed the design of the iPhone 6 Plus to include underfill in May of 2016. My video got 100,000 views in late April of 2016. That's pretty interesting to me. A lot of you have made jokes, and it's obviously a joke, that I should work at Apple, or Apple should hire me, or I should show them how to put this stuff together so it doesn't fall apart, and it's obvious why that's a joke. I had a high school education that I graduated with a C-. I am not a professional engineer with any formal education. I'm just a technician that works and rants in the back of his little Manhattan store. But it is kind of interesting to see that right after I do this video, just a few weeks later, Apple starts putting underfill under the chip, as my video suggested they should have done when they manufactured the phone back in 2014. It's not engineering genius, it's just basic common sense. And if that basic common sense were followed, Apple would have saved a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of trouble, and a lot of heartache. But we need to focus on the crux of this story. It's very clear from the fact that A, Apple changed the materials from the 6 to the 6S, B, they did their own internal testing that showed that it bent, and C, tens of thousands of user reports that Apple was very, very obviously aware of the fact that these phones had a defect. And they made a conscious choice to not tell their users that. They made a conscious choice to make the users think that it was only cases of extreme physical damage or carelessness that would cause this to happen. I find that to be very morally reprehensible. Apple understands that because of their ecosystem and their marketing, that their customers are, how do I put this? Very dedicated to the brand. Apple understands that they have that Ryan Gosling, Blue Valentine-ish relationship with their customers, where regardless of what goes wrong in the relationship, the customer is going to assume that it was something that they did. It was their fault in some way, not Apple's. To take advantage of that abusive relationship dynamic that Apple has with their customers, in my opinion, is morally reprehensible. Apple is treating their customers that spend $800 on an iPhone 6 Plus worse than how Motorola treats customers that spend $179 on a Moto G. It's very important here to highlight the fact that Apple's own internal documentation makes it clear that not only were they lying to their customers, but they were 110% certain that they were lying to their customers. This wasn't a case of ignorance where they weren't really sure if it had more issues, or they weren't really sure if this was a design flaw. No, they redesigned the motherboard of the phone. They knew that they messed up. They did internal testing to see how it bent, and they documented the results of those tests that confirmed that all of you are not nuts. That is really important. A common criticism that I receive when I recommend Lenovo or Motorola products is that Apple has a store. Where can you go if you have a problem with a Lenovo? There's no Lenovo store. There's no Motorola store. There's no Samsung store. But with Apple, you have a store. And that's great, right? Because you get real support. The reality of the fact is that when you go to an Apple store, they'll tell you that for the low price of $349, we'll give you a refurbished phone with the same defect, the same issue with the M1 pad, and a motherboard that came out of another phone that was bent. Don't delay, buy today. 3-month warranty, almost guaranteed to fail on month 3.5. That's not really a deal in my opinion, and that's a way of giving a middle finger to your customers. You're going to charge them twice as much as what they could have paid for something like the Moto G, for something that's going to last less than half as long, and that's going to have a 90-day warranty because it's a refurbished device. In my opinion, that's a really, really bad solution. And the way one of my YouTube commenters put it, which is perfectly, which is, but Apple has stores! And it says 2 things happen when you bring your Apple device to one of their stores. You get told to F off and buy a new one, or they ship it to someone else for a week. And when they do ship it to somebody else for a week, they're going to replace it with a refurb. Now here I'd like to show you just how hard it is to break a Moto G. This is one of those phones that I really regret replacing with a Samsung S7. This phone costs about a quarter as much as my Samsung S7, is more durable, is liquid resistant, has expandable storage, runs faster because it doesn't have TouchWiz, and it costs about $179. Take a look at just how difficult it is to break this phone that costs $179 with no case, and you tell me if you think $800 for a device that's this vulnerable as the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus is worthwhile. Android is starting. 3% battery. Not cracked. Not cracked. Not cracked. Not cracked. Oh, that hit the pad. That doesn't count. That doesn't count. No case. Not cracked. Ow. Hit me in the knee. Not cracked. And finally cracked. But do you see how much work it takes to actually break a Moto G? And to be clear, I'm not here to belittle you, I'm not here to insult you, I'm not here to demean you because of your choices. Every single one of us at some point in life has had a bad relationship, where maybe we were being taken advantage of or abused, or just not being treated well, and we just couldn't see it from our own perspective. We needed a friend or acquaintance to snap us out of it. And that's what I'm hoping to do for you. Like any abusive partner, Apple not only abuses you, but they also attempt to silence you when you tell others about the abuse. In those videos that I linked to below where I was covering the iPhone 6, which I believe there are 3 or 4 videos in the topic, you'll see that in several of them, I talk about how Apple was silencing people on their community support forums. People post to the Apple Community Support Forum when they have an issue with their device, and people will post trying to help them. When people would point out the issues with the iPhone 6 Plus and the Touch IC, the fact that it had no underfill, and the fact that the issue lies with the M1 jumper, Apple would delete it because it would be questionable or bad advice, and they would even ban people that posted this to their own forum, while simultaneously, according to their own internal documentation, acknowledging the fault and changing the design of the phone to include underfill under the chip so it wouldn't happen again. Not only did Apple ban people for saying they were posting incorrect information, but they redesigned their phone as if that incorrect information was true. Here, I've provided and laid out the evidence in a clear and concise manner that makes it very obvious that if you were one of those individuals who was charged $149 to $349 to fix the Touch IC defect with the iPhone 6 Plus, that you're in an abusive relationship. I'm not going to tell you what it is you need to do next. I'm just going to provide you with the evidence and information that you can hopefully use to make an informed decision about how it is you choose to spend your money in the future. Because if you choose to continue spending your money in this fashion, then Apple has absolutely no reason to change how they do business. They have no reason to try and design more durable products. They have no reason to try and be honest with you. And they have no reason to try and attempt to make things right when they do something wrong. The iPhone 7 has lots of baseband issues and also audio IC issues. As you can see in some of Jessa Jones's recent videos, they bend in almost the same area as the iPhone 6. If they get away with it, and they're allowed to do this, and they're allowed to continue making the same amount of money, if not more, while screwing over customers, this is the world we're going to live in. As I say, most manufacturers follow and copy Apple. They try to copy the good, but in many cases they copy the bad. If other manufacturers see that they can get away with this, then they're going to start cheaping out and doing the exact same things that Apple does, creating the exact type of disposable hardware, and we'll be living in this abusive relationship with every cell phone manufacturer there is. That's not a world that I want to live in. So hopefully this has been informative, and as always, I hope you learned something.